everyone loves to talk about ADHD hacks, but what we're really talking about here are just tools, practices, and techniques that support our neurotype, that help us to alleviate executive dysfunction, to get on with our lives, and to move in a way that's aligned with our energy and the way our brains work. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about 5 hacks, but really just the tools, techniques, and practices that have worked best for me this year as I've been experimenting with different ways of working with time, energy, priorities, etc. If you're new here, hi, my name is Avery, and I help justice-aligned, neurodivergent, and nerdy humans to cultivate ease and self-trust as we grow into our emerging future. So at the end of the year, 2023, I decided I wanted to talk about just a few of the things that have worked really well for me with my personal ADHD brain. It's not going to be the same for everyone, but I've been experimenting with different ways of sort of planning, setting intentions, working with my time, and there are so many of these out there. I'll probably at some point do a video where I go into more of them. But I found that actually in practice, some of the things that worked the best for me were some of the most sort of simple concepts or simple frameworks to work with ADHD, and honestly that could work for a lot of different neurotypes, I think. Nothing is one size fits all though, and I think that part of the challenge with the idea of a hack is that sometimes it seems like it's going to be one easy thing that fixes everything, and I think we all know that that's not really a thing that exists. So these 5 things that worked for me, they also had to work alongside more general observational practice of kind of tuning into what's going on with my needs, with my capacity, with my body, with my health, you know. No tool, no technique, no practice is going to work 100% of the time. That's not the goal. So these are things that have worked for me either a lot of the time, or that I've been surprised by how effective they were. In some cases that I was pretty resistant to that actually ended up working. But alongside all of them, I'm checking in with myself, and sometimes you'll find that if a technique isn't working, it's not about the technique, it's really about something that's underlying, an emotional thing that's happening. Not really, you know, feeling good about the overall thing that you're trying to achieve. Having challenges in terms of what support systems are available to you. All of these things are going to, of course, impact how well these tools work. So I really encourage you, if you're experimenting with tools, if you're trying things out, to do so from a place of self-forgiveness, from a place of trusting yourself to try things out and to know what does and doesn't work for you, from a place of experimentation and understanding that the goal is not 100%, that the goal is not perfection, but it's just to see like what things are supportive for your ADHD and what things don't really work for you, and maybe to some extent kind of starting to feel into the why and what are the kinds of practices that work best for your ADHD. As you're doing that experimentation and figuring it out, I'll just flag that I have a pretty cool pay what you can resource. The suggested price is just $5. It's a tool that I like to call rescue lists, and I'll leave the link to that below. It's a place where you can record things that work well for you, no matter what your neurotype is. It's very much about figuring out your own personal tools, your own supports, and what kinds of things work in the moment when you're in particular emotional states. Like you're feeling bored, you're feeling unmotivated, you're feeling particularly sad or upset, you're feeling particularly angry or frustrated. You can kind of define the states that you want to work with, and then this resource is just a downloadable tool where you can kind of make note of what works for you, because a lot of times when we're in a sort of crisis mode, we can't remember. With a lot of times our ADHD brains, we're not going to be able to remember anything that actually works. So I found it's really useful to keep this kind of thing in a place where I can quickly access it and kind of triage the situation. So if you think that would be helpful for you, again, it's pay what you can. The link is down below, and I'd love you to check out my rescue lists. But let's get into it. The 5 ADHD hacks that I found most useful this year. So, number 5, I'm calling this just do it, don't analyze it. So easier said than done, obviously. But one of the most simple principles that I've noticed with my ADHD is that often the things that I'm resisting and the things that I'm struggling with and the things that I keep thinking about doing, once I actually do them, they're easier than I expected. Now, of course, you can't just bully your way into out of task inertia. There's a certain kind of inertia, and especially I happen to be ADHD. If you're autistic and ADHD, there's the concept of autistic inertia. But in general, inertia being the idea that like once you're moving, it's easy to stay moving, but when you're still, it's easier to stay still. And so getting started is often going to be the challenge. And that's okay. Like, I think acknowledge that, forgive yourself for it. But something that I found is figuring out ways to give myself a little push into the doing. Often once I start doing it, I will either stay in the flow of doing it, or it'll be way less time than I thought it would take. Often with ADHD, we estimate our time way under, and it takes a lot longer. But I found that with certain types of things, especially like little administrative things, kind of annoying things that I have to do, once I do it, I'm like, oh, that literally took 2 minutes. Like, why did I procrastinate so much? So one way that I've implemented this idea of, just do it, don't analyze it, is noticing when I'm in an overthinking state. Is just trying to kind of build up a practice, build a habit of observation of, oh wow, I'm thinking a lot about this thing on my to-do list. So if I'm spending a lot of time thinking, or maybe planning out in my head what the steps look like, etc., I'll just try to give myself a gentle question of like, could I just do it now? Like, do I want to just do it now? Would that feel better to just do it now? If the answer is no, it's okay. I give myself permission not to, but try to just do it now. Another way to implement this that a lot of people talk about with ADHD is kind of giving yourself a short amount of time, or a kind of minimum version of the thing. Particularly for something that is kind of repetitive and feels really big, is to say like, what if I spend 10 minutes doing it? What if I spend 5 minutes doing it? Whatever feels small to you. If 10 minutes feels big, then make it 2 minutes, right? But a lot of times if you say, I'm just gonna start the thing, and then I have full permission, brain, if you're resistant to it, it's 2 minutes. Can you handle 2 minutes? Sometimes that works. Sometimes that doesn't work. But often I find that it does. Part of this is also that if I have a list of things, sometimes I'll get into an analysis mode where I really want to like think about, prioritize, compare, consider, what's the ideal schedule? Where do I put things? What would work well? It can even paradoxically be a totally understandable impulse to like want to plan out, how do I work best with my brain? I can spend lots of time tagging tasks and saying what's low focus, what's high focus. And I'm not doing anything in that time. So I've sort of started to encourage myself to just do things a little more linearly. And that seems totally not my jam, right? I'm a very fluid person. I'm a very adaptable person. I'm a very go with the state of change. And I still am. But especially if I don't have a strong call or strong pull or strong feeling that I want to be doing X, or that X feels really good right now, and I'm just looking at a list. That seems simple, but it's not always to your brain. Start with the first thing. Just start with the first thing. Because all the time that I'm spending thinking about which thing to start with, I'm not starting anything. So just starting with the first thing and seeing how many things you can get through and just not analyzing it. So that's one. I'm sure it sounds kind of like, oh, easier said than done. And it's true, it is easier said than done. But that's just sort of a thing that I have in my mind to notice, am I analyzing a lot? Are there ways that I could just do it? And if I can't just do it, I let that go. So that's the first one, is just do, don't analyze. Number 4 is batching. Not a shock if you consume any content related to ADHD. I'm sure you've heard about this, so I won't spend too much time on it. but just the simple concept of batching. So batching is where you do like things together. Noticing, particularly, I found that like noticing what are the kinds of tasks that do have that inertia problem where once I get started, it's fine. But trying to kind of task switch, because this is really challenging with ADHD to do a lot of task switching. So trying to say, you know, every day, so sometimes I would, like one of the things I've experimented with is trying to give myself a little bit of time each day to do something and saying like, it's kind of the first one, right? Say, okay, we're gonna be minimal. We're gonna, if we just read email newsletters 5 minutes a day, we would be on top of email newsletters. But the fact is that it takes 15 minutes to get me doing the 5 minutes. So for something like that, it makes more sense for me to say, I'm going to spend an hour a week. Or something like, for me with like content, if you do any kind of content, blogs, videos, anything like that, social media, it works a lot better to do the like kind of finicky posting, scheduling, tagging, making thumbnails, all of that, like once a month or twice a month in a big batch. And then have all of it done. So noticing what are the tasks that seem to be particularly suited for batching, and then finding ways to kind of schedule in batches to, when you start to do one, be like, could I just do 5 right now? And seeing how that works for you. I find that not everything works the best for me in a batch, but some things do. It also leverages the hyperfocus. You know, I think there are healthy ways. Unhealthy ways, we'll talk a little bit later about hyperfocus in this video, but leveraging that tendency to like, once you get into something, you're getting into it and you're just kind of there, you can kind of blow through a whole batch more easily that way sometimes. Okay, so number 3, I'm going to call this proximate planning. So what I mean by proximate planning is paying attention to the things that are closest to this point in time, rather than trying to plan out everything all the way down the line. So I did another video, and I'll try to remember to leave a card above, about this grid planning technique that I came up with. That is probably not, probably reinventing the wheel. I'm sure people have done similar things, but the grid planning is a way that I've been doing this, where I look at the big picture and kind of the big picture intention of something. And then for each chunk of time that's shorter than the whole thing, so let's say it's like something for the entire year. For each bit of time that's shorter, I'm only going to focus on the next period that's coming. So like, what is my intention towards a big annual thing for this quarter? But not really worrying about what it comes after that, because I don't know, because change happens, right? Things change. So like, what is my this quarter? Great. And then I'm not actually planning out everything that happens in this quarter. I'm saying, what is the big intention for the quarter? Where do I want to be at the end of the quarter? Okay, great. If that's where I want to be in the end of the quarter, what does this first month look like? And not looking at every month, just the first one. And then within that month, that's where I start to say, okay, look, there's an intention for the month. That's sort of the granularity for me that it goes from intentions to plans to action steps. So like, I have an intention for the month. Okay, so what am I going to do this week to move forward on that intention? But not deciding what happens in week 2, 3, 4, 5. Like not trying to, because I think it can get really, sometimes like certain neurotypes can get really into like the puzzle pieces of how you put it together and how you plan. It can be really fun. And I think like, I don't beat myself up for it. It's soothing sometimes to do it, but just knowing that it's probably fake if I'm doing it that way. That planning what is the most proximate to this moment in time. I'm going to have more information. I'm going to have more information about the thing. I'm going to have more information about my capacity and where I am. You know, what if I get sick in a month? And then all the planning I did doesn't really matter anymore. So paying attention to like, what is the thing that I'm going towards, the intention. I like to use the word beacon. You know, what is the beacon that I'm swimming towards? But if you're swimming towards a beacon, you don't know what kind of fish are in the water way in front of you. You can only see like what's right around you. If you're a tarot person, I know some people who follow this channel are, you can think of the hermit card and the lamp, and the way that the hermit is carrying this lantern and it's only lighting up like his next steps. So I like to ask myself, like, what is the next thing that needs to happen to move whatever it is along. This could work with routines as well, not trying to think about all the way, like all the details of what your ideal routine would look like, but like, what is the next like little bit that you can adjust from where you are right now, and then find out next week, where are you next week? So proximate planning, it's just a way of kind of being in the present moment and acknowledging that ADHD brains often are not great at super long-term planning. I usually don't recommend, actually, like for a lot of things, I don't really recommend setting intentions past about 12 weeks out. I'm going to try to do a video before the end of the year about year planning. And I've really moved away from like annual goals and intentions, because I think a lot of times the ADHD brain can manage about 12 weeks and then 1 quarter. And beyond that, it's kind of all, I don't know who I'm going to be, let alone what I'm going to do beyond that. So acknowledging that, and acknowledging that the more detail, the closer you are to this moment. Number 2 is break it into steps. Okay, another really common piece of advice. And I'm sort of, for this one, I'm kind of combining 2 things. It's like break something into smaller pieces, and then identifying key priorities, a small number of key priorities. So I don't think, to be clear, if you combine this with proximate planning, I don't think that you need to break an entire project into all its steps right when you have the idea for the project. But once you've identified the like proximate steps, the next action, if I'm noticing resistance, it's really helpful for me to notice, what am I resisting about this task? Are there hidden tasks underneath it? So a lot of times when you're feeling resistance to a task, it might be a tiny thing, but it might be something like, I need to clean something, and in order to clean something, I need to buy a cleaning product. Well, those are 2 tasks that have very different contexts. Buying the cleaning product is something you need to do at a certain time when you're at the store, when you're thinking about adding things to your online list or whatever, however you shop. It might be a fairly like easy thing, a lower focus thing, but it's not a lot of effort, but you have to do it at a particular time, a particular way. And then the cleaning itself is a totally different thing. It's when you're at home. It's when you have the spoons to clean. And so I found especially this happens a lot where the sort of pre-step is a totally different mode than the other step. Another example, like I need to, right now, a friend bought a tarot deck for me, and I need to mail the tarot deck. And one of the steps was figure out what the guidebook was. And then once I found the guidebook, I want to actually skim that guidebook before I send it off. So it's like, that's like sitting and reading. That's very different from going to the post office. So if you notice yourself resisting, it's really helpful, even if it seems silly, to put the separate steps on the list instead of just the one task. And not, because I would often tell myself, it's fine, I know what it means. I know that it's really more than one. And you do know, but it's really helpful, I think, visually, to just be able to see the pieces and to understand the pieces. And also that can help you to figure out, like, where is the resistance? Is the resistance to this part or this part of the thing? Okay. With ADHD, one of the things that's really helpful with any neurodivergent neurotype, I find it really helpful to just pinpoint, like, where is the what is the resistance lying in? Like, where are you finding a challenge or a problem? And that way you can pinpoint what you're addressing. If the problem is finding spoons to go to the store, then that's a very different problem than not wanting to clean, or maybe not knowing where you buy the cleaning product. Right, there's like various things it could be. And we all know with ADHD that like a task is often 15 things. So just going ahead and breaking down into steps. And then related to that, I found that identifying my key priorities even, I can have the most complex, filtered, beautiful, tagged task system, task management, whether you use Asana or Trello or Notion or whatever you use. If you use something like that, and you can see things in different ways, it's still really useful to me. And this was a big change for me, because I would always look at people who had just like a to-do list and be like, how the hell do you do that? Like a to-do this week. Like I have 17,000 things and they're all very well organized. And yet I started doing more of that pulling out, even from my big system. I still use my big system, but pulling out, this week I care about this. So it could be like, today's one win, or this week's one win. It could be 3 priorities for today, however you do it. That style of picking the things, and so breaking it into steps is helpful there, to make sure that it's one step you're talking about. And then it's like, what am I going to make sure I do today? What am I going to make sure I do this week? And having that visually, and having that, being able to check that off or whatever, it just reduces some of the overwhelm of looking at the whole system, even if you can filter it down in a lot of ways. I find that it's so tempting to just like jump around and be like, let's view it this way, no, let's view it this way, and I'm like not doing things. So it's back to just doing it. Is having that very limited list for a short period of time. And then I can say, awesome, I did it. And the nice thing about that too is that at the end of the day, if your brain is yelling at you and saying you didn't do enough, you didn't do your, you're not productive, then you can say, well, I did my one thing, so we're fine, right? Or I didn't do my one thing, and that's okay. Can I do it now? Do I need to make an adjustment? What am I noticing? Why did I have trouble with it? Do however you need to do. Finally, number one, the most helpful ADHD thing for me this year, again, not like shocking, but it was Pomodoro. So I have tried Pomodoro a little bit on and off over the past 15 years maybe, but I never really got like super into Pomodoro. If you don't know, Pomodoro technique is just the idea of setting a timer for 25 minutes, 5-minute break, short break, then you work another 25 minutes. Once you've done, is it 3 or 4? 25, 20. Yeah, I think usually it's I've seen people do it different ways as well. But I think typically it would be 3 Pomodoros. You get a long break. 20 minutes. Again, it kind of varies a little bit. There are tons of apps you can use. Just look up Pomodoro timer. The one I use, I think it's called Marinara. It's a Chrome extension. So I can just hit a little tomato at the top of my Chrome window, and that's an easy way for me to do it. You can get one on your phone. You can have an actual tomato timer. Pomodoro is just tomato timer. Italian word. You can use a physical timer if that works well for you. You can use, do I have it nearby? I don't, but the timer cubes, a lot of times people find useful. Timer cube, just Google it. With ADHD, it can be nice because wherever you are, you see it, you just grab it and you turn it on its side, and that sets the timer. So whatever way you implement it. Pomodoro, I found really useful because it hits some of these other ones that I've mentioned. And I'm also using it kind of in conjunction with some of what I learned about flow states and recovery and the flow cycle. So when you get into a flow with something, it can be really tempting. I think with ADHD, a flow state can easily become more hyper-focused. And then a hyper-focus, you can easily get stuck in it, as I'm sure you know, for hours and hours and hours. And then you go, oh shit, I haven't peed. I mean, how many times, right, have you gotten up from your desk and realized you desperately had to use the bathroom, and you're really thirsty, also hungry, also have you taken your meds today, also you're exhausted, right? It's like this list where suddenly when you come back into your body, it's like every alarm's going off. So I like the Pomodoro technique because it allows you in the short breaks. I use those for those kinds of bodily need check-ins, particularly peeing, drinking water, and looking away from my screen. So when the 5-minute break happens, I'm like, okay, look away from my screen, rest my eyes a little bit, check in with my body. Do I need the bathroom? Am I drinking water? Cool. Yes, no, maybe so. Address needs, return to work. When I get to the long break, the nice thing is that what research has found with the flow cycle, which maybe I'll do a video on at some point, but what research has found around this is that if you're in a flow state, and even though hyperfocus is not the same thing as flow, I think a similar principle could apply if you end up in hyperfocus. But when you're in a flow state, you really max out somewhere between 90 and 120 minutes. Depends on the person. I just say 90 because go with the shorter number. So 90 minutes is about 3 Pomodoros. 25-5, 25-5, 25-5. That's 90 minutes. So once I've done 3 Pomodoros, I know that I'm probably getting close to maxed out on my ability to be in focus, to be in flow, or to be in hyperfocus. And it's time to come back into my body, come back into the world, and do some kind of active recovery. And so that is the concept of what flow researchers have found, is that to get yourself in a really healthy relationship with flow, you want to get into that zone. It always takes a little bit of, and this is not a video about flow, so I won't describe this, but there is a little bit of an initiation to get into the state, how that works. And then once you're in it, it's great. But if you spend too much time in flow, the relationship with dopamine, which we know with ADHD is a little bit, we have a complicated relationship with dopamine, is that you kind of get into this burnout cycle. So if you spend really long time in flow, then you're kind of going to have a dopamine crash. And I'm sure if you've had hyperfocus and you experience this where you're like, I'm doing it, and you don't want to leave, right? Because if you have ADHD, you might be like, I may not focus again for a week, so I just got to stay until I'm like, bleh, I cannot physically work anymore. And then you're in such a crash state, your body's like, I will never do this again, right? And so it takes a while to get back into that. It's all about kind of trust with your body and communication with your body. If you're in that crash cycle, your body probably is not really trusting you. It's sort of saying, oh, I don't know, I better not focus because then they're not going to let me unfocus. Practicing this idea of cycles has been helpful, I think, because I've noticed that when I do this active recovery, which can be co-regulating with another person, with an animal, sitting out in nature, moving your body, like a little dance party, could be doing some cooking if that's something, something that kind of gets you in your body, gets you in the zone, ideally co-regulating with others. It just gets you, it kind of does a flush of your system, basically. And I'm not really into the whole biohacking thing, and I think there's a lot we don't know about the brain, and so I say these things about dopamine, but they could easily be disproven. Why it works, I don't know, but the fact is that it works pretty well for me, and I've noticed that it's really funny when you take that 25 minutes of active recovery before you try to reinitiate a flow cycle, suddenly the task gets easier. So the first one that we talked about of just do, don't analyze, it's a lot harder to do when your brain is shutting down. If I find myself in a space where I'm like, I don't want to do it, I'm resisting it, I don't force it, even if I haven't gotten to the 90 minutes, I don't force it. I'm just like, okay, we need to step away, right? And when you come back, after doing something like a dance party, touch, being out in nature, being with an animal, whatever it is, typically I find that it's just weird how much easier it is to do the thing. And if you were in that state of analysis, it's like, why did I sit there thinking about it for so long? I could have just done, taken a fucking break. I know it seems revolutionary to take breaks, but the Pomodoro thing works well because if you're using an actual timer, right, it's a cue, it gets you, you do have to respect it. I know that can be hard with ADHD. If you have a lot of notifications that you're used to ignoring, dismissing, we can talk about that in another video, but finding something with maybe a unique sound, experiment with it, see if you're able to do it. You might not be able to, and that's okay. But if it works, using that, you do have to, it's really tempting to just be like, oh, 5 more minutes. Don't do it 5 more minutes. Just take the break. If you're in the middle of something and the long break buzzer goes off, just type down one sentence, when I get back, I am doing this, so you don't forget. And then just fully let yourself release from that state. Do your active recovery. and then come back. That's worked really well for me. 3 Pomodoros, do the active recovery. And then often what I'll do is I'll ask myself, do I want to go through another flow cycle, or am I done for the day? Have I done enough cycles that I'm done? And so giving myself permission, not saying, oh, we're always going to do, 5 cycles of this. No, it's not going to happen. And it's good to give yourself some time to kind of just like mind wander, let yourself explore, not be in that state all the time. But experimenting with this, even just doing 1 cycle of that a day, 1 cycle of that a week. Start where you are, start with what feels realistic, and then just see how it feels. And if that works, then slowly adding up over time. I found that can be really helpful. It's a great way you can combine that with batching. You can say, like, I'm going to do a batch of X for this Pomodoro cycle. You can look at your, proximate planning, the steps you've broken out, the key priorities, and like, that's what I'm going to spend a Pomodoro cycle on, or flow cycle on. Flow cycle of Pomodoros on. So those are just some ways to work with it. So that's my 5 ADHD hacks, tools, techniques, practices that have worked well for me this year. I'd love to hear from you below. What works for you? What doesn't work? Do these things work? Do these things not work? If you've had challenges with them, let me know. I'm happy to do a more extended video on one of them, or answer some of your questions in the comments below. And if you need a place where you can remind yourself of what works and what doesn't, have a place where you can quickly reference when you're in a kind of a state, then I would encourage you to check out the rescue list tool below. Pay what you can. Suggested price is only $5, and it's a useful downloadable tool that you can totally customize to yourself and your own neurotype. And I hope you enjoy that. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next video. And if you want to know when that's coming, newsletter, subscribe below. You can find out about videos, blog posts, free resources, upcoming offerings, discounts, early access. All the good things are on the newsletter. All right, we'll see you in the next video.